This is Pankaj Mittal, Dr. Murali Krishna, Dr. Ashokan, distinguished dignitaries, fellow speakers, participants in the 3-day virtual International Science Talk on Nobel Prize 2022 topics, organizers from the SRM University, ladies and gentlemen and students. It is customary, while inaugurating a conference or a seminar, to say that it is a pleasure and privilege to be with the gathering. But truthfully, when SRM Institute invited me to deliver the special guest of honor address, in addition to the keynote this afternoon, I was more puzzled than pleased, and with good reason. In itself, a keynote for a conference on such an ambitious subject as a Nobel Prize is challenging enough. But an inaugural address is even more challenging because, in terms of depth and spread, it has to be of relevance to the whole world of knowledge and practice. I have been a practitioner with a lifelong association with scholarship. Or to put it conversely, a scholar with over 35 years of real experience in one of the most challenging professions in public service. This straddling of two worlds gives me a unique Janusian perspective that I would share with you this morning. President Kennedy used to quote his favorite lines during the Cuban Crisis, and this is how they read: "Bullfight critics, row on row, crowd the enormous Plaza de Toro, but only one is there who knows, and he is the one who fights the bull." Therefore, this is the one simple but classic question that I will address this morning. Is theory valid for its own sake or for its relevance and usefulness to the practitioner? Let me detail at the outset the flow of my argument. I will first explore the reasons for the antipathy between theory and practice, ultimately moving to a position that they are validated in each other. Theory may begin as an intellectual exercise, but finds its validation in its usefulness to the practitioner. On the other hand, practice without theory is fragmented and ad hoc. Then I move to the second part of my argument, that the dichotomy between theory and practice is artificial and it is possible to reconcile the two. From that position, another question arises: what kind of theory, which particular discipline is most appropriate for or useful to practice? This is the third part of my argument. The real world, the world of the manager or practitioner, is multifaceted and dynamic. It is non-linear and does not lend itself to neat solutions or a single perspective. Typically, the practitioner is confronted with a situation which she has to manage or handle. Each approach that she might follow is fraught with not one but multiple problems, and their solutions may be conflicting. She has to bring the wealth of her theoretical learning into the management of that situation and find piecemeal specific solutions that make up to a holistic resolution of that situation. So, a multifaceted, multi-perspectived discipline is relevant to practice because that actually is the nature of practice. The real world is multidimensional. A multi-paradigmatic field is especially attractive. This is the essence of my argument. Let us now deep dive into my talk. I begin with the historical perspective of the rift between theory and practice. When Immanuel Kant wrote in his 1793 essay on the common saying that may be correct in theory but is of no use in practice, that is the name of his essay, he unleashed a debate that has reigned for 3 centuries. Kant's focus of attention was ethical theory, the alleged rift between the theoretical and practical in normative philosophical disciplines. But over the years, the theory-practice debate has become marked in fields like sociology, management, organization theory, and public policy. These areas involve a group of people who, unlike doctors, engineers, or scientists, do not rely on technical knowledge for their expertise. Donald Schwan, the author of The Reflective Practitioner, calls these people practitioners, people who can be counted on to do their job, but not necessarily to define it. A number of reasons lie behind the antipathy between theory and practice in the practitioner-based fields. For one thing, practitioners believe that theory cannot capture complexity. Practitioners criticize academics as living in ivory towers, being out of touch with the real world. Academics describe practitioners as too concerned with nuts and bolts, unable to see the big picture. Practitioners often review and reflect upon situations in order to make sense of them, but they reject more systematic theorizing. When practitioners refer to the real world, they often do so when theorists comment on practice but elide context, overlook constraints, take the wrong things for granted, overestimate control, presume unattainable ideals, underestimate dynamism, or translate comprehensible events into incomprehensible variables. When practitioners complain that no one is addressing the real world, these are really complaints about a situated activity and the ability of people to conceptualize activity within a context. The scientific model of theorizing puts off practitioners. A practitioner does look to influential studies for guidance, but often finds advice that is desultory and vague. Recommendations are either narrow or contradictory. Engelhardt evocatively describes, and I quote him, when faced with the very word research, practitioners see a white-robed person floating on a cloud, pontificating polysyllables, interspersed with some recognizable words such as the, and, therefore, but little else that is familiar. The temptation is to tug on the bottom of the white robe with one's dirty hands and say, "Excuse me, I am down here. Please look at me. Would you tell me in plain language, what are you saying so that I can use it? Humanity is dying down here." And I close his quote. The practical universe is large and diverse. Theories appear unable to capture its complexity. On the other hand, to expect quick, practical, and useful answers in such complexity is unrealistic and unfair to the theorist. Secondly, practitioners are heterogeneous. They come in many levels and many flavors. Even if a theory deals with a specific issue or a policy or a program, its audience is not homogeneous. For example, if a theorist were to take up the issue of rule of law, for instance, who would he address? Practical advice for lawmakers is irrelevant to the policeman. For practitioners who work at the level of specific policies, programs, and projects, it is important to disaggregate an overall governance concept into specific characteristics. effective police organizations and practices, codified laws that effectively regulate individual, group, and organizational behavior, judges trained to apply the law fairly, authoritative processes for conflict resolution, and so on. Third, theory is concerned with what should be, what ought to be. Practice concerns itself with what is. Such normative differences complicate any translation between scholarship and action. Further, theory ignores both the process and the politics of implementation. Theory seeks to rescue policy from the irrationalities and indignities of politics and make policy instead with rational, analytical, and scientific methods. But in actuality, it is not possible to divorce practice either from the process or the politics of organizational or public decision making. Fourth, generic theory does not fit local reality. Third world practitioners like you and I are often unable to relate to theory developed in Western contexts. There is a gap between what is borrowed and what fits. One Chinese scholar lamented that China has yet to develop its own theories. As far as theory building goes, most Chinese scholars merely import. They have borrowed ideas and theories from various schools in the West and applied them to the Chinese context. If scholars continue to borrow ideas, the development of theories to explain and predict phenomena in China will become problematic. Korean scholars also concur that conventional Western theories are not adequate to fully explain what really transpires in the Korean setting. Direct participation in their own Korean system may be a way to root theorists more solidly in the realities and complexities of Korea. The gap between scholars and practitioners seems linked to the fact that scholars largely refer to foreign sources of information and guidance, while the latter take counsel in the local managerial staff and in their own felt experience. Indian scholarship has also to address this gap. Finally, theory creates better theorists, not better actors. If the purpose of a theoretical education is to create more informed actors on the public stage, this is belied in reality. A theoretical education proceeds to create in its own image, to quote the famous words of Alexander Pope, to produce better theorists, not better actors or managers. Action requires more than knowledge. It requires an appropriate set of skills, critical awareness, and confidence. To know about leadership does not make one an effective or a responsible leader. Rather, skills and sensibilities in applying those skills are needed. Effective education is to comprise learning. Effective education is a body of knowledge, acquiring technical and interpersonal skills and developing a sense of maturity that enables the individual to do the right thing at the right time. Much of what business schools teach are readily learned and imitated by any intelligent person. On the other hand, things like communication ability, interpersonal skills, leadership, and most importantly, wisdom, the ability to weave together and make use of different kinds of knowledge, are less easily taught. Paradoxically, these are the very skills that lie at the heart of the leadership role in management. Now, on the other hand, there are many who believe that the dichotomy between theory and practice is artificial. That the difference between theory and practice exists more in theory than in practice. As we saw earlier, the whole theory-practice debate seems to be more explicit in fields like sociology, public policy, or organization studies rather than the pure or hard sciences. There is also some evidence that the dichotomy is not a historical inheritance and may no longer be necessary. Let us look at why. First, there are historical linkages between theory and practice. The intellectual origins of the study of public administration and sociology began with the pioneering work of the Fabian thinkers, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Their classic studies of local government and poor law administration in England combined rigorous research with practical reform. Their emphasis was on a pragmatic, ethical socialism that led to the establishment of the London School of Economics and Political Science for training an administrative cadre for governance. Second, there has been a steady globalization of knowledge and practice between indigenization and internationalization. The former position advocating a nationalist or a regional perspective, and the latter a worldwide study and international application. Globalization has made governments and organizations not only increasingly aware of global pressures for change and reform, but also relentlessly nudging them towards making decisions that incorporate global constraints and opportunities into domestic agendas. National boundaries are becoming porous and affected by the global environment. The old mode of ad hoc situational problem solving no longer holds good, and drawing patterns and lessons from experiences elsewhere are becoming an imperative. Third, we see a relentless professionalizing of theory. In professional education and action, the clear, hard lines between theory and practice become blurred. Knowledge from several disciplines is of potential relevance in fields like management or public policy. A profession is an applied field rather than a scholarly discipline. It uses theories from a range of formal disciplines, appropriating and resituating them in its own professional context. Professions are also not wholly dependent on imported theories. They create their own theories. These theories may be based on empirical research and conceptual frameworks peculiar to the applied field, practitioner maxims, practical principles, a preferred view or ideology of the profession, or personal theories. If theory and practice are not dichotomous, what is the problem in joining them? Could it be as simple as perception or a lack of communication? If we look at a way to bridge the gap, it appears to lie in a conscious move from self-engagement to other engagement. As we begin to look at theory in professional disciplines, the bridging of the gap between theory and practice becomes a possibility. But this requires that we understand theory in a much wider sense than hitherto. There is a distinction between technical rationality and professional or practitioner rationality. Technical rationality is problem solving made rigorous by the application of scientific theory and technique, and those who practice it, like doctors or engineers, apply general principles of medicine or technology to specific problems to achieve unambiguous results. However, we have increasingly become aware of the importance to professional practice of phenomena, complexity, uncertainty, instability, uniqueness, value conflict, which do not fit the model of technical rationality. Practitioner rationality demands a unique style of approaching problems. Instead of simply problem solving, practitioners need to determine the decision, the context, the ends and the means. Problems do not present themselves as givens. They must be constructed from problematic situations that are puzzling, troubling, and uncertain. A practitioner must make sense of an uncertain situation that makes no sense. This provides us with an alternative starting point to explore the nature of theory. From a practitioner perspective, the key criteria are utility, effectiveness, and alignment with their goals. We move from an academic position of self-engagement, such as paradigm development, publication, citation, course chain, to alternative parameters of engagement with the practitioner's world through actionable research. When we adopt this view of theory, we expand its meaning beyond the content of academic discourse and publications to include practitioner discourse, public discourse, lay theories, and personal theories. Whether or not they are explicitly acknowledged, theories have a strong influence on how we interpret and understand the world around us. Professions advocate critical thinking and reflection to keep individual practice under critical control, even when it cannot easily be articulated. This helps practitioners to explain, understand, and critique occupational practices and to appreciate new thinking about the role of their profession and new forms of practice. We understand this commonly as best practices, the sharing of best practices. Theories related to the ideology of the profession are important in discussions of its goals and purposes, especially in occupations based on personal interaction with clients. For example, the civil service, to which I myself belong, across the world, it sees itself as neutral, apolitical, able to tell truth to power. A representative of a pharmaceutical company, to take another example, dresses, acts, and interacts in a certain accepted way, quite different from, let us say, a professor. Theories based on practitioner maxims may be found in How to Do It books and are based on domain or cultural knowledge. Theories are also embedded in practices, which are learned without necessarily understanding their theoretical foundation. Such implicit theories can be developed by the aggregation of experiences or by participation in a community for whom certain theories are implicit in their taken for granted world. There is also a distinction between espoused theories, ideologically correct and acquired by education, and theories in use, that is what people actually do and how to reconcile them. Practitioners' implicit theories differ from theories found in academic publications. They are seldom stated but are inferred to explain observed behavior. Thus, those observed are understood as if they are using the in-use theory. So, let me conclude that whether we accept it or not, theory and practice are locked in a marriage of sorts. They are two halves of a whole. Theory is not irrelevant to day-to-day practice. The assumption that practice does not need theory is tantamount to setting sail in a ship without first possessing knowledge of navigation. How would one know that she or he has arrived when there is no course established? Practitioners who assume practice can be effective without the parameters set by theory find themselves simply reacting to whatever the day brings. In common parlance, it is called firefighting. In a similar way, assuming that theory does not need practice is comparable to setting a course without the ship, confident that the course is right for any ship, regardless of its cargo, crew, or ownership. Without practice, where is the ability to field test? What is there to examine or measure without practice? So, it is time for theorists and practitioners to kiss and make up. Practitioners and theorists practitioners and scholars must realize that they are married to each other and have been for quite some time. Even if this marriage is not very comfortable, neither divorce nor separation is possible. With this matchmaking of theory and practice, I wish the 3-day virtual conference of the SRM University and the SRM Institute of Science and Technology all success. Thank you all and Jai Hind.